gets into the boat with his disciples, and he says, let's go to the other side. We assume that that's simply going from here to there. But in the first century, the other side was a proper name. So it was capital O, capital S. The other side was, as I'll explain, a fearful thing for the disciples. We've already talked about Tiglath-Pileser. The Assyrian king comes in, conquers the Galilee, 721, 722. He then carries out all the young men. We talked about that, imported other young men. The Hagalim, Isaiah says, the Galilee of the Gentiles is in darkness. Remember? And to the people in darkness will come a light. We've talked about all of that. So, as a result of that, when the Hasmoneans took over, in 140 BC, the Hasmoneans come in, they defeat the Assyrians, drive them out, set up their kingdom, called the Maccabees. It's called the Hasmoneans because that was their family name. And then they had to start a new country. And so they needed money to start their new country. And what do you do to get money? You tax the people. And the other thing you do is you sell the most valuable thing you have to sell, or things that you have to sell. What was the most valuable thing the Jews had to sell? The high priesthood. And so at the time, in 140 BC, we stop having Levitical high priests. And we start having wealthy, non-Levite high priests that can afford to pay the price to be in charge. Now, of course, Judas, one of Judas' brother, Judas Maccabi, one of his brothers becomes the high priest. But after that family goes away, for the rest of the Hasmonean period, they sell the high priesthood. When Herod comes, he likes that idea, so he continues the process. So when Jesus is here, we don't have a legitimate high priest. We have someone who purchased the right to be the high priest. And we know that was Caiaphas. Anyway, the result of all of that was this high anti-Gentile sentiment among the Jews. So we already talked about Peter coming to Cornelius. Says, my law says I shouldn't be here. Well, that was across the board among the Gentiles. The dividing line between the Jewish west side of the lake, Sea of Galilee, and the Gentile east side of the Sea of Galilee was the Jordan River. So the Jordan River becomes the break-off between where the good guys live, where everything's kosher and clean and ceremonially accepted, and where the bad guys live. By the way, you're where the bad guys live. The bad guys, unclean, ceremonially unclean. So when Jesus says, let's go to the other side, now let's begin to imagine what's going through the mind of the disciples. Does he know? I mean, he grew up in that little isolated town called Nazareth. Maybe he doesn't understand. Said, Peter, you better tell him what you're going to find. I'm going to tell him. So John, you tell him you're his favorite. I'm going to tell him. Andrew, you tell him. You're the first one that saw him. No, I'm going to tell him. Somebody's got to tell him, because when we get to the other side, there are Gentiles there. So what's the first thing that happens when he steps off the boat? Yeah, a demoniac comes running toward him, full of demons. Well, before we get to that story, I'm getting ahead of myself. Mendel Noon is a local expert on the lake. He's written several books about the Sea of Galilee. He wrote one whole book on the fish in the sea. And he did some archaeology searching, and he found that just down by the shore was a dock here at Kursi. And there were some foundations of administration buildings. There was a dock that he discovered. Now, we also need to realize that in the first century, the lake was 4 feet higher than it is today. which means it came up the shore about 150 feet more than it does today. So the sea is, they say the sea is down currently from what they'd like it to be. It's way down from the first century. First century it was 4 feet higher, and so the shoreline came much closer to us here than it does today. Jesus comes here to the land of the Gerasenes, I think Mark says. The Hebrew word's Gerashim, S-H. And Gerashim simply means in Hebrew, expelled. The expelled ones. When Joshua brings the children of Israel into the land, these are the people who are expelled from the Jewish side of the lake, and they come here to reside. They're the expelled ones. Let me read. I got to go back and forth here. This is Mark chapter 5, verse 1. So they arrived at the other side of the lake in the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out of the tombs to meet him. This man lived in a burial cave and could no longer be restrained even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrists and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough even to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. When Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed down before him. With a shriek, he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out of the man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus demanded, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man." Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them to some distant place. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. "Send us into those pigs," the spirits begged. "Let us enter them." So Jesus gave permission, and the evil spirits came out and the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd was about 2,000 pigs. They plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. So this church is a 4th century church, and it commemorates that occasion, and also the feeding of the 4,000. So we'll talk about both stories here for a few minutes. So you can imagine what's going on in the mind of the disciples. On the Jewish side of the lake, you walk through a cemetery, you become unclean. You prepare a body for burial, you become unclean, have to go through the cleansing process. They step off the shore here, and they're living in the tombs. They're living in imagine what they're thinking. Is he nuts? Somebody has to tell them. You can just see them begin to step backward. Where's that boat? And then Jesus has this encounter with this man. He cast the spirits into pigs. Why pigs? Well, Pixner, Bargil Pixner, that I told you about, says this in his book. The Canaanites sacrificed pigs to demons. These were pigs that were being raised. This was not a wild herd. These were pigs that were being raised by people to sell as sacrifices on Canaanite altars. And we know that's true because when the owners of the pigs show up, what do? They say, "What have you done to our pigs?" So this is someone's income. So why do the pigs run into the ocean, or into the lake? It's one of those concepts that we've talked about before. My mind just went blank. It's a picture of something else. So all through Scripture, water takes on has evil connected to it. Let me give you some examples. In Psalm 74, out of the water comes a multi-headed monster. In Isaiah 27, there's a leviathan and a serpent in the water. In Daniel chapter 7, 4 beasts come out of the sea. And in Revelation 13, we have a beast with 7 horns and 7 heads that comes out of the sea. So for the locals, the concept of the sea was so mysterious that what in the world is under there except evil and mystery and beasts and dragons and all of that, all of those kinds of things. So they're being raised to be sacrificed to demons, and the demons end up running into the sea. 2 insights about the story. First of all, and I didn't continue to read, but if we continue to read the story, when the owners of the pigs show up, what do they ask Jesus to do? Leave. Leave. They ask him to leave. So, and what does he do? He leaves. He leaves. Now, what had just happened before they landed on the shore? In verse 35, it says, "Let's go to the other side." What happens between verse 35 and chapter 5, verse 1? What is it? There's a storm, and Jesus is asleep in the boat, and the boat is. They're afraid they're going to die, and they wake and say, "Don't you care that we're going to die?" And Jesus stills the storm, and then he rebukes them for their lack of faith. And then they step off the boat, and here's this demon that comes challenging him. Now, so he stills nature. Nature can't destroy them. He confronts demons, casts them into pigs, and the pigs are cast into the sea. Demons can't stop him. You know what the only thing that can stop Jesus is? Your will. Because when people asked Jesus to leave, he got back on the boat and he went back to the Jewish side. Why do people find it hard to commit themselves to Jesus? Because Jesus will always take them at their word. He will never force himself into your life or their life. We may know what he's asking of us. We may know that he's called us. We may know that he's encouraging us to move in a certain direction. But he'll never throw a rope around us and drag us there. Human will can defeat what nature and the demonic cannot defeat. Second thing we have to realize is, when the gospel confronts making money, guess who's going to win? Here with these men's entire money, future money in these pigs, in the lake. They've lost everything. Sometimes, and when you're ministering to those that God has called you to minister to, neighbors, family, maybe you have a hospital ministry, maybe you go to nursing homes, maybe you have best friends who are unbelievers, and you're ministering to them. Anytime money comes up, money will always win. Because money is the force that drives us. So Jesus gets in the boat and he goes back to the other side. Isn't it interesting that the expelled ones now become the expellers? Those that have been expelled to this side of the lake are now expelling the Messiah, the Son of God, to the other side of the lake. And then before we leave the story, what does the young man who's now been cleansed from the demons do? He comes to Jesus and asks if he can go back with him. And I'll not jump back and forth to the text, but we probably remember the text. What does Jesus tell him? No. He says, you stay. What's he tell him to do? Well, first of all, let me ask, why wouldn't he leave? Why wouldn't he let him go? Why didn't Jesus take the young man with him? Because he was a Gentile. Well, what did Jews do to Gentiles on that side of the lake? They would stone him. Remember this anti-Gentile sentiment that had risen because of the Assyrians? That continues right up to Peter. We talked about it at Caesarea. If that young man would have stepped off the boat on the Jewish side, immediately they would have killed him. Jesus is saving him. But then he gives him a job to do. What's he tell him? Go share with the people what I've done, what God has done for you.